There's a voice deep inside every dad calling him to lead. Society, vices, inner demons, negative thoughts try to dampen and drown out that voice, but it never goes away. Your wife feels it, your children feel it, and your heart and soul feel it too. It's the voice that starts off as a whisper, but then becomes a calling to be the tip of the spear for your family, a calling to play all out and lead by example for your children, a calling to build a legacy that will go on for generations, a calling to be the warrior dad you were born to be. Dads, our children need us now more than ever to be that beacon of hope, courage, positivity, and strength. It's time to rise as warrior dads together as a brotherhood. If you felt that twinge in your soul, it's time for the Warrior Dad Experience. Welcome to the Warrior Dad Show. I am your host, Jeff Wickersham. I am pumped, excited to get into this discussion about how to raise resilient kids with my guest, Jeff Nelligan. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jeff, thanks for having me.
You are quite welcome. So let's get into it. Let's hear a little bit about you as a dad, and then how do we raise resilient kids? Because resiliency, I feel like, is such a critical component to being able to succeed and thrive in life, because you're going to get knocked down, right? You get knocked down 7, you got to get up 8. So would love to hear, one, family dynamic, kiddos. I know you got boys that are a little bit older than my guys. And then let's get into some of those lessons, and we'll talk a little bit about your book.
You bet, Jeff. Hey, and the whole ethos behind Warrior Dad is something that I never thought of. And yet the way you've articulated it in the podcasts and, with your business, it seems like that's maybe what I was living as a young father with young kids, and continuing now up until today. And I think the core is kind of what the three themes that you noticed was, the energy, the consistency, and the accountability. And the idea that if you're showing all three at all times, your kids are going to sit up and they're going to notice and they're going to replicate that kind of behavior.
Yeah, so true. And I think that's such a missing component that unfortunately a lot of dads miss. They say something, but then they don't do it. And the kids have a great BS meter, and they will do more of what you do versus what you say. And I know you have 3 boys that are they in their 20s now?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And they went through their journey. Share a little bit about them as well, just to give context.
Sure. We were talking earlier. You said, my guys are at the gym with me at 5:15 in the morning. I love to hear that. I'll tell you, that's maybe the most pleasant thing I've heard all week, because it goes back to maybe this is the Warrior Dad, thrust, is the engagement with the kids, the sons, the daughters. And when you mentioned that, I remembered vividly, and it's in the book that you have, 4 Lessons from My 3 Sons, is I just didn't sit on sidelines or attend games or practices. Every weekend, every evening, I was out there sweating it with them, not because I'm some kind of martyr or hero, but the kid, the young kid, if he sees the old man right next to him, it's going to be ingrained in his mind that, this kind of activity, this thing is good. And that has the longest shelf life you can imagine. My 3 sons were deeply involved in athletics at an early age.
Okay.
From 4 all the way to the end game, when the youngest was 21 and he was at West Point, first team All-American rugby.
Nice.
And that's a huge swatch of games. And just for that one kid, I attended over 1,300 games. You can multiply that by 3 and you get the sense of that engagement. And I think that the athletic fields, and it's something you kind of go back to a lot, just the athletic portion, it's the greatest it's the greatest testing ground for three things. Number one, the camaraderie of a team. Number two, the discipline in getting good at something. You're not going to be a D1 athlete, maybe. You're not going to be D3. You're not even going to make the high school team, but you're constantly striving to get better at something. The third thing is adversity. You mentioned it earlier. You mentioned it in a lot of what you do. Everybody gets knocked down. No one gets a free ride. And the sooner that kid hits that wall and that obstacle and has to get up by himself or by herself, the better he's going to be down the line.
Okay. And I love that. And let's unpack each one of those real quick, right? The camaraderie piece. How did you cultivate that with you and your three sons? I know, because I read it in the book, but share it with the audience. Some examples that dads could put into action like this weekend and do with their kids, right? I think that's so impactful.
Yeah. I'm glad you used the weekend motif, because our weekends, there was a routine. We went to the fields with other dads and other kids, or sometimes just the four of us. And we would take a football, soccer ball, lacrosse. And that's what we would do for 2 or 3 hours. That was morning on a Saturday. There was no cartoons. There was no looking at devices or anything. It was, we're headed off there. We're going to meet, the Joneses and the Smiths, and we're going to play ball for a couple hours. And by the time, at the end of it, you're going to be tired, but you're going to have that feeling that something was accomplished today. And that meant sprints. That means, kicking field goals from some guy's shoe. That means how many lacrosse balls can you throw back to one another? It just builds that kind of, that warrior, that rugged spirit in a kid that physical activity always gives to them.
No, I love that. And when I read it in the book, it just struck me, because my boys, we did that. Like we Sundays, hey, Dad, can we throw the football? We go down to the local high school. We're running routes. I'm throwing it to them, and then I'm running routes, and they're throwing it to me. And it's such a, and it gives me goosebumps just to talk about it. Like, dads, when you're listening to this, that's what you need to do to build deep bonds with your sons and your daughters, right? So that's just, and it's going to be fun. It's going to keep you young, because you're going to be running around, you're going to be active. And when we're active, there is just such a bonding that happens when we're doing hard stuff. We're physical. It's just amazingly powerful. So I love how you frame that up. Let's move to number 2, right? Discipline.
Yes. One of my kids once said to me, he was just starting out in football. He was about 8th grade, and we were, talking about how he's going to get bigger and faster, and footwork, which is essential to all sports.
Yep.
And I said, well, you look pretty good. He was playing, 8th grade football. And they said, well, you look pretty good in the last game. And he said, Dad, good is not good enough. And I thought, oh my gosh, how did you learn? I wish I'd learned that. I wish I'd learned that at age 45.
Right.
Forget, 13. Good is not good enough. And that's just that grinding motor that, you're going to keep practicing. One of my kids said, when we were moving out of our old house into a new house, he says, oh, I remember that wall, where we got everything piled up against. He said, I used to spend hours with a lacrosse ball trying to hit that one brick, because that would, give me the hand skills to, really fire it across the field when I had to. And I thought, that's just that discipline, which is not hard. It's just continuing at a task until you've mastered it. And so that's the key about sports. And can I just say too, it can be not only the athletic fields, that's a metaphor, but it can be pushing a kid in robotics, or in the theater, or in a marching band. Yep. Just that engagement with that kid in that certain task, where the kid sees dad next to him and knows that he's supported and he can get better. So it's, the athletic fields are a perfect metaphor, because it really requires a lot. But there's some kids that are not going to be great at sports, so they're going to look at something else where the dad has to be engaged.
Yeah, and I think it's so essential when they find out what they
love,
pour in and do that with them,
Yes.
because those are going to build bonds. I mean, I just had a dad who's in class 6 of the Word Dad Experience. And one of the reasons why I came to it, and he was actually a former fraternity brother of mine. He's got a stepdaughter, 17, and she's leaving for college in a year, and they hadn't bonded. Well, 2 weeks, next thing you know, he gets a call and she asked, "Do you like Justin Timberlake?" And he says, "Yes." And next thing you know, they're going to go to a concert together because it's something she's interested in. Right. And that's so important. Then the last one you touched on, adversity. How do we get through it? How do we build that? You know, that's part of your subtitle in your book, that resilience in our kids. So what are a couple things that we can do as dads to guide our kids through those difficult times? Obviously, we're not going to snowplow the road. They've got to face those hardships. And I'll share a story after you do of one of my sons, what he went through. But what are a couple things that we can do as dads to help that process and build that resiliency?
You know, this is going to sound counterintuitive, Jeff, but when you say setbacks and adversity, I actually loved seeing my kids in a tight situation, whether it was on a field or before a test or going to meet a brand new bunch of new people at some event. I liked seeing it because I thought they're going to have to learn right now what it takes to get over this. And if they don't get over it, they're going to remember next time this happens how they can get over it. We had many, many tests in my family. One time I took my kids to it was a tryout for a play. They went to an all boys school. They were asked to be at this girls' school to help support a production of Pirates of Penzance. And they were young kids. They were in 7th and 6th grade. And they didn't want to do it. And I said, look, you know, it'll look good on your record. It'll look good to your teachers. They wouldn't buy. So I said, I'll give you $10 if you just go to the tryouts. If you don't like it, I'll be waiting outside. So we went to the girls' school theater and I dropped them off with each had $10 in their pockets, and I drove away because I wanted them to know if they come outside and the old man is not there, they're going to go back inside and they're going to be part of this production. And if that was the adversity. And of course, when I picked them up, I said, I didn't have to wait very long. And they said, Dad, we knew you'd drive away. Yeah. We knew this was a test and we knew there was no alternative but to go back in and be in the play. So I'd love to hear your story.
Mine was one where my oldest was playing on a new travel basketball team, a new AAU basketball team, new coaches.
AAU,
he was always top 1, 2, 3 kids on the team, and this was a new team, and he wasn't playing much, and he was struggling with that fact. And my wife and I decided, hey, let's get the number of the coach, and you call the coach and ask him what you need to do to get better. And he did. He had a conversation. I didn't, obviously I facilitated him getting the phone number, but he had a conversation. And by the end of the year, he was one of those top 2 or 3 kids again playing. But it's like if you've got to correct it and you've got to fight through it and you got to be resilient. Right. And too many times now I see parents just fixing things for kids. Gosh. And we're not doing our kids any favors by doing that. Yes. Is that the knee-jerk reaction? Yeah, we all have it, right? But if you have that mindset of building resilience, building grit, building some mental toughness, they've got to go through those trials and tribulations, because they're not going to get, like you said, we were not going to get out of life without going through the fire multiple times as you go through the process. So another thing I want to touch on, because I read it in the book that really opened my eyes, situational awareness.
Oh yeah.
And calling out things that are happening that aren't right, or that can be great lessons for your kiddos. So share a story or two of what you did with your 3 boys in that situational awareness.
You bet. And situational awareness essay. I mean, that's been my kind of watchword ever since I got out of college, because I was in the political sphere for 30 years. And the idea was that whenever you go anywhere, walk into a room or a Home Depot or a restaurant, you read the crowd. you look around and you just get a sense of what's going on, who's hot, who's not, and that there's going to be no surprise because you've taken a good glimpse of what is in front of you and thinking of how to handle any situation that might appear. Now, it's tough to get for a young kid, but you can build it. One of the techniques that I used is when we were out in that real world, like the Home Depot or the restaurants or the mall or athletic events, wherever, I would just point out stuff that was right and that was wrong. If you saw a senior helping, an adult helping a senior open a door, right, you point it out and you say, that's the way you need to be.
So true.
If you see a jerk kid who's on his phone while his parents are humping his gear back from a football game, you say that kid's a jerk. You never want to be like that. So kids are immediately given this, tableau of what is right, what is wrong, and how they should behave in situations like that, which will occur throughout not only their childhood, but their life.
Yeah. And I think that's so powerful when it's happening in front of them.
Yeah.
And you can say,
right,
hey, that's a great thing that adult held a door for a senior citizen. And I reinforce it with my boys. I mean, we go into the Y, and my youngest son held the door for somebody behind him today. And I said, hey, that's how we are as Wickershams, right? But same thing. I think I shared before the call, one of the, guy at the Y got out, had a smoke before he went in. And I said, don't ever be like that. Like, that guy's not getting ahead because he's having a smoke before he even walks into the YMCA. Right. So pointing out the good, but also the bad are very, very powerful lessons. The other thing I got as I'm halfway through your book, we're cut from the same cloth related to busy. How do you feel about what I feel is the dirtiest 4-letter word in the English language is busy?
It is. Oh, I couldn't agree more. Don't you hear it, Jeff, every day from almost anybody? I mean, I hear it
all the time, every day.
Oh my gosh.
Constant.
I hear it at work. I was just on 2 phone calls earlier and I heard it. And I just thought, my gosh, and it's always prefaced by, and you probably noticed this, I'm crazy busy. I'm so crazy busy. And I tell you, the third time I hear someone tell me they're crazy busy, I say, you're not crazy busy, you're crazy disorganized. And of course, that hardly, fills the bill. But yes, I agree with that whole term and the way it is just so easily thrown around.
Yeah, it's people's, I think it's just an excuse for not taking control of their life and doing the hard work and setting priorities. You get the same 24 hours in a day that I do.
Right.
We just prioritize. We make sure that we hit the mark on those big value activities that we attack. And I've seen it happen. And I shared a story before we jumped on. I'll share it with the audience. This morning, coming back in my truck, was in front of the neighborhood, and I saw a bus, and it had 20 or so kids, and they were getting on, and I was standing, sitting in, waiting for the bus to leave for about 5 minutes. And all of a sudden this mom came sprinting up, hold the bus. And then her daughter came sprinting up. And I've seen it happen multiple times. Dads, if that's occurring in your life, your kids are going to pay that price.
Yeah.
If they're dealing with anxiety and stress, that could be a huge contributing factor to why they are, because they're not on time. You're not disciplined. You're not organized. It has a trickle down effect in everything that your kids are doing. So I'll just ask comments on that one.
The being late thing, and we joked about this earlier. I had a drill sergeant when I was in the Army. This is a basic training at Fort Benning, home of the infantry.
Yep.
And he would always scream at the platoon, if you're 5 minutes late, damn it. If you're 5 minutes early, damn it, you're late. I.e., you need to be prepared to be early. And so it resonated throughout the whole of my life. And of course, it became this great phrase that we would shriek whenever we were having to go somewhere. And then, of course, we'd shriek it whenever we saw people showing up late to the event. And you're exactly right about telling this to dads, obviously, of which I am one. If your tempo is panic and chaos, your kid's going to be psychotic by the time they're 10. And it's so easy to be early. It takes no skill, no talent. It doesn't take a big brain. It takes nothing to be early and to see and check out and be prepared for whatever is going to be coming at you next. And the fact that people aren't on time means, as we talked about before, that they're more important than you, because it's your time that's being burned. So
Yeah.
it was a huge theme in our family, and it remains the same with them even today. And
Yeah.
you should mention my 3 kids are military officers.
Okay.
So they're leading from the front, to borrow one of your phrases.
Mm-hmm.
They have to set an example for the dozens and dozens and sometimes hundreds of enlisted men and senior NCOs that are below them.
Yep.
And the first lesson is the commanding officer is always there ahead of time. Mm-hmm. So I need to be there ahead of time. And it's a priceless lesson. And so your example of the bus is ideal.
Yeah. And you're spot on. I mean, I huge respect for the military and the discipline and the structure and your 3 sons and you serving. It's just so powerful to set the standard. And dads, we set that standard for our families. You can adopt that military mindset for the family and set the standard, and your kids will follow. And I was laughing, audience, as I sent Jeff a note earlier with the link to jump on. I said, be 5 minutes early. And I said, no problem for you, because I knew what his drill sergeant had said. And I was here 8 minutes early, and he still beat me, and we were laughing about it because I said I was going to see who made it earlier in the in jumping on. So I love mantras, and I know you've got them throughout the book. Let's talk about the book a little bit. What are a couple mantras that your family, you and your boys used that are powerful that maybe other dads might be able to adopt and apply and leverage in their family dynamics and how they lead their kiddos?
Sure. I mean, I think the first one, and we kind of talked about it. Life is simple. It's just not easy. And you can get a handle on easy if you just drive at it, maybe with that warrior spirit. The first thing a kid has to be is, personal conduct. You're on time. You follow through on jobs. You have that self-awareness. The second one is developing confidence. You're the guy that walks in that room and feels at ease because you've done it dozens of times before, and you've become this muscle memory, this reflex to do the right thing. The third one we talked about was that adversity part, being able to rebound from absolute, tragedy or catastrophe and not just fold like a $3 suitcase. That ability just the grit to dig in and say, okay, I'm faced with this. What's the immediate advance I can make? That drill sergeant once, again, that stuck with me for 40 years, 30 years. Assess, adapt, advance. Those 3 ideas whenever you face an obstacle. The last one, and you're going to be getting into it soon, and I bet a lot of dads already are, is ambition. How do you create that ambition in a kid so that he always wants more every day, and that it leads him to something that is going to be worthwhile and satisfying for him?
I love that last one that you just mentioned, ambition. It's near and dear to my heart with 15 and 13-year-old sons. And
that's what I meant. Yeah.
One thing I encourage dads to do, and I do with my 2 boys, is I share the vision. I know where they want to go. I share that I see the vision before them because it's very tough for them to see it. But if they have somebody else that can share that, hey, this is the vision where you're headed, then they get empowered, and then they get that. I think it stokes that ambition flame in them. And I'll share. I sent a picture one morning this football season to my oldest son, and it was a picture of him staring out to the empty Beaver Stadium up at Penn State University.
Penn State, sure.
And I said, that's the vision. Chase it.
Wow.
And I had some dads that said, well, you're going to be setting them up for success. And I said, BS. Well, if I can't dream and I can't share the vision, they're not going to chase it. It's not my job to say, you got to be realistic. Screw realistic. Like, that's my mindset around it. And I'm interested to hear your opinion.
I would agree. I'll tell you, maybe we're agreeing too much here. I'd agree 100% because there's nothing realistic about a kid who's 15 or 13. They can do anything. I know. I've seen it in my own sons. My son walked onto the rugby team at West Point, having never played the sport, because they didn't take walk-ons for the football team.
Okay.
He's a big kid. He's a sharp kid. He's an Arabic French major. And he walked onto the rugby team, and after 70 tryouts, 70 kids trying out, there was 3 left, and he was one of them. 4 years later, he was first-team All-American in rugby and the MVP of the national championship game, which West Point won, and now he plays pro rugby.
Unbelievable.
When he started, after his second semester at West Point as a freshman, and he had made the team, he says, "Dad, I think I can play pro." And instead of saying, "You're out of your mind, you're going to be an infantry officer in Africa or the Middle East, and a ranger," I said, "I bet you can, because you're such a hard ass about everything you do. You could get there."
I love it.
And there he is playing pro. And I remember the conversation as he does. So I agree with you. There's nothing, don't worry about realistic. When kids are at that age, they can do anything.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. I've loved the discussion. Jeff, where can people find the book? Where can they find you?
You bet. My book is at www.nellgianbooks.com. The title is 4 Lessons from My 3 Sons, How You Can Raise a Resilient Kid. The key is it's the 2nd edition. It's new and improved from the one I wrote 5 years ago. I'm on LinkedIn as Jeff Nelligan, Facebook at Nelligan Books, and on Instagram at Nelligan_books.
Jeff, thanks for being on the show. I'll definitely link those up in the show notes. Love the discussion.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for what you're doing. I hope you get to that 1 million dads.
I will. That's
really
where
do.
I'm dedicating my next 30 years. So I will.
I know.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Appreciate you listening. Appreciate you watching. Dare to be uncommon. Love, lead, legacy. Create a legendary day. And I'll talk to you soon.